Hey Tires, Darren here. Welcome back to another fly tying tutorial. Today we're going to be tackling the Gierach Special. This was created by the noted author John Gierach, who, if you've read any of his books, you'll get an idea of kind of the traditional fishing that he likes to do. I believe it was in Trout that this fly first made an appearance. Initially he had tied this as a nymph, and he had tied it on a smaller Mustad 3906B hook, and he had tied it in specifically to go after bluegills and rock bass. This version evolved from that, being that he wanted to fish for trout with this streamer, as it had a lot of the traits that he was looking for in a trout fly. So he tied this on a longer streamer hook and called it the Squirrel Tail. Sometime later, while fishing at Mary's Lake with his nephew, the kid comes up and he goes, "Hey, why don't you lend me a few of those Gierach Specials?" And it was at that point that the fly received its official name. So this pattern's evolved over a few seasons to get what you see here. And so that's what we're going to be tying up today. Let's get started. All right, let's get a fresh hook in the vise. I'm tying this on a bit of a vintage Mustad 3665A limerick hook. If you don't have any of those in your inventory, you can get the Mustad L87, which is the signature equivalent. So I'm using a Danville 6/0 red thread. And we're just going to start by tying on at the eye, and we're going to wind that down. Don't have to have close touching turns, but you just want to get a bit of thread on there just to establish a base. Just do that to the hook point. I'll snip that off. I'm going to add a little bit of lead wire to this fly. We'll put approximately 20 to 25 wraps of lead in the front half of this fly. That looks good. So we'll cut that off using the back of our scissors. And we'll push down each of those ends. Now we're just going to pass our thread through here. I like to put the base of thread on there just to make sure that that lead doesn't move at all. And we're just going to add a few extra wraps of thread here just to kind of build up a taper between the hook shank and the weight. All right, next we're going to add a flat diamond braid in pearl color. This is a little bit different than what John probably used on most of his first ones. He probably had a diamond braid which wasn't flat, but I believe this is a bit of a newer material that wasn't available at that time. But I do like it because it provides a nice, a bit of a nicer tapered body. So we just tied that in starting behind the weight, and I'm going to give a couple half hitches. And if you don't have a rotary vise, all you need to do is just wrap the diamond braid forward. But we do have a rotary vise here, so just to help speed up the tying process, we're just going to wrap using the rotary feature on this vise. So I like to add just one extra wrap at that junction between the body and the weight, just to make sure that it's got a smooth transition and not a large bump. And then we're going to tie that off right after the weight. All right, want to make sure we've got thread on both sides of that material so it's locked in. Trim it away. All right, so first thing we're going to tie on is a little bit of bucktail. We're going to tie in a belly of bucktail. We don't need a lot. I usually start by snipping off a small bit, and then I'm going to just pull out the shortest hairs, and then I'm going to take the longest hairs, pull those out, and I'll just match the tips with what I think would be somewhere in the middle. And you don't want it, I mean, you can put it in a hair stacker if you like, but I actually prefer to have a few shorter, a few longer to give it a bit more of a natural look. And we're just going to tie that on so it's just a tiny bit, a few hairs past the bend of the hook. So we'll just measure that and then we'll trim it. And we'll hold that in place. Just a couple light wraps just to make sure that we've got it placed where we want. And then I like to just take my thumb and kind of give it a little bit of a wiggle so that all the different hairs settle into the respective grooves. And then I'll add a few more wraps just to make sure that it's tight. And we'll flip that hook back. If you don't have a rotary vise, you can just pull the hook out, turn it upside down, and put it back in the jaws. So next we're going to take a little bit of gray squirrel, and this is a nice material to work with. And we're just going to take a small wing's worth. So what I like to do is just pull the hair that I'm going to use out at a 90-degree angle and measure it along the hook shank, and then cut it at angle right off the tail. If there's any little hairs, you want to just brush those out. We'll measure that. We want the wing to be a tiny bit longer, and then I'm going to cut on an angle and then tie that wing in so that the longest hairs are at the bottom, and then I've got next longest, so that they're not all tied in one group. This makes for a little bit more secure wing. Tend to get hairs pulling out if you tie them all in one big clump, but I prefer to tie them in a few at a time. I believe that makes it more secure and less likely to pull out. You want to give that a tug just to make sure that there's no loose hairs in there. Make sure that your wing isn't going to come apart. So next we'll take about 3 strands of pearl crystal flash. And I'm going to tie this along each side of the wing. Just tie that right at the head. We'll flip it over and tie it along the other side. There we go. So you want to, again, I like to give this an adjustment with my fingers every once in a while, make sure that everything's kind of in its place. So lastly, for fly materials, we're going to add one of my favorites. It's just a little bit of peacock herl straight off the stem. I'm going to take 6 herls, and I'm going to stack them so that they're all about the same, approximately. Same length at the tip. And then we'll tie those in on top. Trim off the butt ends. Then we're just going to create a nice tapered head on this fly. Now we just need to add a whip finish. And then we're going to add some painted on eyes. If you're doing a bunch of these for a trip, you can tie the fly to this stage, cement the head, and then you can do all the eyes at once just to kind of save on a bit of time. So every time I do eyes, I make a little tool. It's basically just a toothpick. I use the short end for the pupil, and I cut it at the thick part using an X-Acto knife just to make the whites of the eye. So I usually just put a bit of paint in the cap, and then I'll just dab. You don't need a lot. Pretty sure if this paint stays good for my entire fly tying career, I will never go through that small bottle. So we just dab on each side, and then we can flip it over, and then we'll do our black side. You don't need much paint at all, just a very, very little bit. Again, I just dip that into the cap just to make sure I got a bit of paint on there. There you go, it's as easy as that. I'm going to give that a few minutes to dry, and then I'll come back and give that a coat or two of hardhead or head cement or Sally Hansen's, whatever you choose. Alright, there you go, that's the Gierach Special. Until next time, keep a hook in your vise.